All right, welcome to Live, Lead, and In Between, a podcast for leaders who want to be better at leading in life and everywhere in between. My name is Travis Jones, and I'm your host. And this is our first podcast of the new year. I know that I'm a little late to the game. It's and getting this out, but I've had to get some equipment and things like that and make sure I knew what I was doing, because one of my resolutions and goals for the new year was to make sure that I had some video content to go with the podcast for this year. So that being said, it took me some time to actually get a hold of some of the equipment, get it ordered, things like that, and make sure I had what I needed and knew what I was doing. And I'm still not 100% sure I know what I'm doing with it, so we'll give it our best shot with this. So again, welcome to Live, Lead, and In Between. So at the end of last year, I had been talking to some folks about how to engage the audience of my podcast. There are some listeners that I have some local access to that I just have a conversation with, and I had two really good recommendations. One of those was the video element of things, which I said, yeah, that's great. You know, people do like to do that video. So got some video support now. And the second part of this that they gave me, this other person told me that they said, well, who is your podcast geared for? And I've answered that question before, and I thought, well, maybe I need to revisit that question. So what I'd like to do as a start to this is actually answer that question. Who is this podcast geared for? And it's in the title, Live, Lead, and In Between. So this podcast, in my opinion, is geared toward leaders in everywhere, every area of life, but specifically, I would say the ministry component, the ministry area of life that are involved in local church ministry, ministry of any type, because that's the circle I'm involved in. Now, the principles do transfer across the board from ministry to non, so they're completely transferable. But specifically, ministry is the aspect of leadership that we talk about a lot on this podcast. So ministry leaders, and then also any area of any leader in any area of life. Because when I thought of the title and the name for this podcast, the thing that struck me had to do with leading in life. And so often we find ourselves being kicked in the teeth and things like that by life, and don't feel like we're getting anywhere or leading. And so I thought, maybe we'll address some of those things on this podcast, leading in life and everywhere in between. And that kind of gives me license to actually talk about every area of life and in between. So that is who this podcast is geared for. And if you were here and you found this podcast and that's you, awesome. We're going to be talking about some great stuff this season. I think it's the third season for this podcast. So we're going to be talking about some awesome things. So if you're here, but if this podcast is not for you, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you check out, right? Because I've done that before. I'll get a hold of a podcast and I think it's one thing, but then I was like, it's not that thing. So we go the opposite direction. Again, no harm, no foul with that. So I want you to find some content that you're involved with. So hopefully my children will be a little more quieter. It's a snow day today, so we're at home, and so you might hear a little bit of that in the background. But nonetheless, that is who this podcast is geared for. Now, one of the other things I'd like to throw out there for the audience is the video part of this. So if you're watching this, you found us. We're on our YouTube channel, which I'll put in the show notes, as well as Spotify. You can watch us on Spotify, and I believe you'll be able to watch us on Patreon as well. But if you're just listening to this, that's awesome too. Anywhere podcasts are available, you can listen to the audio for this. So, but I would love some audience feedback, and I'm going to put the email in the show notes. And I would love your recommendations for topics in this season, what things we should look at, what things we should discuss. Maybe even, if you'd like to have a guest on that we could talk through some stuff. And that may be a little more difficult because I'm still kind of learning the game with the podcast, especially the video element of it. Audio is easier to do with the guest, but the video is a little bit different. But I'd love to hear that. So the email for Live, Lead, and In Between will be in the show notes, as well as I think there's a comment section where you can leave me a message, even a voice message at some point in the notes. It'll have that. So those are the couple things that I wanted to throw out there. And then one more thing I wanted to throw out there is, and I did this, I think, back in the summer of 2022, I had an idea because I love problem solving. It's one of what I believe is one of my gifts, and I oversee a couple different ministries at the church I serve in, and I find myself in a coaching position a lot, and I enjoy that. I enjoy the coaching element of what I do, so I thought, well, why don't I extend that to the Live, Lead, and In Between genre and audience? So I kind of came up with a coaching element to this. So if you are a ministry leader and you are finding yourself you've hit a wall in any area of your ministry, whether it be personal or your professional side of ministry, or with personnel, things like that, I would love to help you with that. I'm going to put in the show notes a link for Live, Lead, and In Between, our coaching services and packages, and you're gonna see I have an hourly rate on that as well, and then some package deals that you can do on that, and then there are also some additional things, like I do communication, like I will do retreat speaking, conference speaking, things like that. And then, guest preaching if need be, if you're a church that is looking for that kind of thing, like a fill-in. And we talk offline about that, because I know, there are things involved in that are a little beyond just this conversation. But, and then I am ordained. So I also offer wedding officiation, as well as funerals, funeral officiation. So those are on the rate sheet, and you'll find that link there. It'll take you to a Google Doc with that. But all that said, I wanted to jump into a topic for this year, this 2024. And I know I'm late to it, and I talked a little bit about it when I put my special delivery message I preached at the church that I serve at the very first part of the year, and we talked about resolutions a little bit. And I kind of wanted to talk about that because it feels like that's the time of year. This is the time of year to do that. But I want to talk about resolutions and why they suck. Honestly, why resolutions suck, and the second half of that is why we need them. So here, when I make a New Year's and I've made tons, and I've already failed at my New Year's resolution for this particular 2024. The health side of this because of schedule. I'm still working hard at it, but I'm not hitting the markers that I need, so I'm having to revisit it. But resolutions suck because you're having to actually commit to something, and commitment is a difficult thing. Commitment's hard. The lack of commitment is why a lot of marriages fail, because people are not committed to a decision or a direction. So commitment is hard, and that is why resolutions suck, honestly. Now, I think we need them, though, because they stretch us. And you have to know that commitment is worth it. For me, one of the resolutions I made this year, I was actually walking or not walking, I was hiking. I like to hike trails before I run them. And because I'm a trail runner, I love to do that kind of stuff, but I'm not going to go run a trail I don't know. If I'm not familiar with it, I don't want to twist an ankle and things like that. I've done that before, and it's not fun. So I was hiking a local trail that I'd never hiked before, and I thought, I'm going to leave myself a message. I'm going to record myself, and I'm going to challenge myself with some resolutions for 2024. And I thought that'll be an awesome way to actually hold myself accountable. That way next year, at the same time, I plan on hiking the same trail, running the same trail, and I'm going to watch that video. And there were three main things that I really wanted to challenge myself on. One of those was my relationship with my Father in heaven, to really, really get on that and be better at that, be better, more consistent at that, and not make excuses. I think the second one had to do with, what was it? The second one had to do with my health, making sure that I'd love to be in triathlon shape. And I've always had that kind of feel and thought, but I've never been able to accomplish it. I've gotten kind of there, but not quite there, not where I was able to actually do a triathlon. And then the third one had to do with, family life and things like that. And so I challenged myself in this video clip that I took while I was on this trail, and I thought this will hold me accountable. And so with a resolution, you need accountability. And I would even go so far as to say, if you make a New Year's resolution, you need to tell somebody. You need to tell somebody that you trust. Someone that is not just going to give you lip service and tell you what you want to hear, but someone that's going to ask you the question when you're sitting down at lunch or breakfast with them or having coffee, and then they say, hey, how are those goals you set? Because a resolution really is simply just a goal. It's a goal that you've set that you want to have accomplished by the end of the year. So people don't like them because commitment is hard, but the commitment is worth it. The outcome is usually worth it. Resolutions actually, and goals like this, they cause us to play the long game. And the long game is something that like I myself, I don't like playing the long game, because just like everyone else in the free world, we live in an instant gratification society, and I want what I want it now. But the problem with that is that's a problem, because you don't take the future into account. And resolutions and goals, like people normally set at the beginning of the year, have long game connotations. They have their consequences associated with them that are long game and usually beneficial for them. And so the resolutions cause you to play the long game. Now, one of the things that resolutions will also not cause you to do, but expose you in, is I wrote in my notes, resolutions expose your wine. And I'm not talking about a glass of wine. Resolutions expose your wine. When you're in the middle of trying to accomplish something you've resolved to do, a lot of times we will get whiny. We'll get whiny. I've done it. I've been in the middle of a 5 mile trail run, and I walked out and I was like, I'm going to do this today. And in the middle of that run, I'm thinking of 1,000 different reasons why I should just stop and walk, right? And then I start whining and complaining internally in my head. And occasionally somebody's walked by or somebody's been on a bike headed the other direction and they're like, hey, and they'll stop for a second, we'll talk. And I will just blurt out like this whine, like, man, this is the hardest trail I've ever been on, or something like that. I'll whine to these complete strangers. And it feels like it's just a mechanism that popped up inside of me. Now, when I say it exposes our wine, I mean it. It exposes our wine. And when I think about that, there's this coffee mug that I saw on a t-shirt that I saw that I'm super attracted to. And it says this, it says, nobody cares, work harder. Nobody cares, work harder. And that's kind of my mantra. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about my wine, especially when I'm trying to accomplish a goal or resolve, when I've resolved to do something internally and personally for myself and the betterment of myself. Nobody cares about that goal but me. So work harder. Nobody cares about my wine. If I'm looking for sympathy, I shouldn't be, because the resolution isn't for them. And if I'm looking for sympathy, there's something deeply wrong in that with me. I'm looking for something else in that. So resolutions, they suck, but we need them. And so 2024, I want to challenge you. If you have made a resolution, do your absolute best, come hell or high water, to stick with it. And it's going to come, both hell and high water. Once you set a goal and that goal is designed to better you or better your position or better your family or better anything. If it's a leveling up goal where it's going to take you from where you are to where you want to be, then hell will come against you and high water will rise up as well to try to prevent you from doing that. But nobody cares. Work harder. If you've set that resolution, you've set that goal, go after it. Go after it with abandon. Even if you don't feel like going after it, go after it. Because when you do, the commitment is worth it. Because in the end, a year from now, when I look back, my hope, and we can revisit this next year this time, but my hope is that I'm looking at that video and, man, I'm in the best shape of my life. I'm in that triathlon shape, and maybe I've not done one yet, but I am in the shape where I could do one. And I look at the other, that my relationship with the Father in heaven is like more solid than it's ever been, and I'm continuing growing. And my that's what I want to see. But I know what's going to happen the minute I want to see that. Hell and high water is going to raise up against me to try to prevent that. So some of that's in you, some of that's not. That's a whole other podcast where we can talk about external forces that will come against you, both people and spiritual things. But that's not for today. But so I think that's going to close out this first podcast of 2024. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. You can also become a Patreon if you'd like to support the podcast. That's also very helpful. I set this up. There's like a $5 like a membership level, and that's just basic support. I am working on the idea of a live lead in between Deepcast. And what that is that would be a podcast. If you're on Patreon, you would have access to it. And it goes a little deeper into some of our subject matters, a little more raw. So it wouldn't be just out there. It would be available on Spotify, but you'd have to be a member on oh my gosh, I can't even remember. You'd have to be a Patreon to be able to be a part of that. But that's coming up, and I'll talk more about that as we get closer to that. But until next time, this has been Live, Lead, and In Between, and I would encourage you to lead well. See, I don't know what I'm doing after all.